Hello, Denton once again with another gripping, exciting video. A Question of Loki is the topic for this one. Now, in the case of the trickster god Loki, the question is rather easier than the answer to it. The question, one I've seen asked a number of times, is, should you worship Loki? Indeed, is it even safe to invoke him, given his, at times, rather, questionable behaviour? He is often hardly a noble paragon of ethics. His moral compass doesn't always point true north by a long way. That much is rather obvious. But is he actually evil? Or is he just a bit misguided? Is he the product of his background, his upbringing, or does he deserve to be seen by many as evilly inclined? There's a song in West Side Story that I find rather amusing and very true of some people's attitudes these days to bad behaviour in our modern society, where we are told nobody's really responsible for their actions. No, it's not me, it's him. It's actually somebody else that made them do it. And in that song, a juvenile delinquent is talking to Officer Krupke of the NYPD, and he says, "Dear Officer Krupke, my sister smokes cigars. My brother wears a dress. Dear Officer Krupke, no wonder I'm a mess." Yes. Does Loki perhaps fit that category? Now, to begin with, let us dispel two very important misconceptions about Loki. Firstly, he was not the god of fire, though he is frequently stated to be so, but actually he had nothing to do with fire, and he couldn't have started a fire in his own hearth without tinder sticks and a striker to get a spark. That idea seems to have originated in 1835, when Jakob Ludwig Karl Grimm, the elder brother of Wilhelm Grimm, the pair famous as the Brothers Grimm, suggested it in his book entitled German Mythology, which traced the story of Teutonic mythology and folklore from earliest times. And then the idea got a great boost from Wagner's operas, where in the last act of Die Walküre, Odin, or Wotan as he is in German, calls on Loge, as his German name is, saying, "As I found thee of old, a wandering flame," and he commands him to surround the sleeping Brünnhilde with magic fire. The god of fire idea may also have come from the word Logi, which means fire, but that has nothing to do with Loki. Secondly, he and Thor were not brothers. No, as is shown in the dreadfully wrong in everything Marvel Thor movies. But a lot of people seem to think they were. Those movies are about as wrong as any movie could possibly be. You could say that only the names of the characters have not been changed. Everything else, well, having got that out of the way, we shall now take a look at the origins of Loki. Who was he? Where did he come from? And so forth. Now, as I've said, he wasn't the god of fire, but in fact, he wasn't actually the god of anything. And it's questionable if he was, in fact, actually a god at all. He was the son of a Jotun, or giant, and his mother was also a giant. So he must be seen as a giant himself, though he came to be regarded as a member of the Aesir gods, and he took his place in Valhall. Now, Jotnar were not gods, as I said, but his mother is referred to at one point by Snorri Sturluson as a goddess, which is slightly strange, since, as I said, the Jotnar were not gods, though they could become gods. Skadi was also a giant, but became a god of the Vanir on her marriage to Njordr. Though how Loki's mother could become one, I really don't know, but that is perhaps where Loki's acceptance among the gods came from. Now, one theory I've heard is that one of Odin's brothers had sex with a Jotun woman, who then had a baby, and that baby was Loki's mother, which would perhaps entitle him to the status. And further, on the point of being a god of something or other, none of the Norse gods were actually the god of something. Now, they may have been associated with things. Freya with love and romantic things, Skadi with winter, and Thor with thunder and lightning, but it was just that, an association with something rather than a direct control of it. Freya did not make people fall in love. Skadi didn't make it snow. Thor didn't control the weather. And they were associated with those things rather than actually being responsible for them. The Norse gods did not have the direct control over things that the Greek gods did. Loki had a wife. Her name was Sigyn. And they had a son named Nari, a normal child, which was very definitely not the case with Loki's other children, or two of them at least. He had an intimate relationship with a Jotun woman named Angerbode, and she bore him 3 children. A girl, who was seemingly normal, called Hel, spelt with 1 L, and she had 2 more than unusual brothers, Fenrir, a wolf destined to grow to prodigious size, and a giant snake called Jormungandr, which wasn't actually a name as such, it meant great monster. Loki family gatherings in his hall must have been, well, different, to say the least. Don't eat the guests. But the family was split up by Odin, since given the not exactly trustworthy nature of Loki himself, and his children the produce of a Jotun woman, the Jotun are not always too trustworthy, a genetic combination that caused some concern, added to the rapidly increasing size of both the wolf and the snake, it was decided to send them away where they would be less likely to cause trouble. Fenrir was bound, chained up, during which Tyr lost a hand, and Jormungandr was sent to the deep sea that lies around all lands. Hel, herself of course a Jotun, but not seen as dangerous as such, was sent to rule over the realm of the dead in Niflheim, to be known also as Hel, which means hidden, and could refer to her realm being hidden away from the realm of the living. But there is some question over this, since there are conflicting accounts. One that Hel was located in part of Niflheim, the realm of mists, and also that it was separate and called Niflhel, the lowest part of Hel. I quote, Hel he, Odin, cast into Niflheim, and gave to her the power over 9 worlds, to apportion all abodes among those who were sent to her, that is, men dead of sickness or of old age. She has great possessions there. Her walls are exceeding high, and her gates great. The depiction of her as some sort of, half-dead, half-living, rotting corpse-like monster came about only in the 13th century in Iceland, with the Christian retelling of the old sagas and verbal stories by Snorri Sturluson, though he contradicted himself considerably, making her a gloomy, unpleasant monster on one page, and a caring and welcoming goddess on another, throwing a lavish feast to welcome Balder and his wife to her realm, with special mead brewed, and her hall decorated for the occasion. So take your choice, evil, rotting corpse monster, or nice hostess. Loki's role among the gods is really unidentified. He is usually referred to as the trickster god. But see, that wasn't his job, so to speak. I mean, he played tricks. You never knew what mischief he'd come up with next. But he wasn't there in Valhall to do those things. He did them, yes, but he wasn't a sort of Old Norse version of the royal jester to be found at the courts of medieval kings, telling jokes and dancing and keeping everyone amused while wearing a funny hat with bells on it. Actually, it's really hard to say exactly what his role was. What was he officially supposed to do, if indeed he was actually supposed to do anything at all? Sometimes he helped the gods, sometimes he hindered them, and occasionally he caused serious trouble for them. And eventually he was responsible for a tragic incident that destroyed his credibility altogether. But none of what he ever did can be seen as his job description, if you like. I suppose we have to just say that Loki was there in Asgard because he was. And to be honest, most of the other gods were much the same in that regard. As I've said, they didn't actually have any rigidly defined roles. Idun's giving of youth with her apples was about the closest thing that any of the Norse gods came to having a definite, defined purpose. But even in that, she was not goddess of youth, so to speak, since her apple-giving ended at the gates of Asgard. She had no responsibility for keeping mortals young. Her magic was solely intended for the gods themselves, so any status as goddess of youth is, well, perhaps a little questionable. Loki did a number of very important things for the gods, not out of any great desire to benefit them, but rather to benefit himself by earning their gratitude. For example, he was responsible for the manufacture of Gungnir, the greatest spear ever made, and one that would, when thrown, could not miss and returned to the hand of he who threw it, which he presented to Odin. He was also responsible for Mjolnir, the mighty hammer that he gave to Thor, a weapon that none but Thor could use, and one that, like Odin's spear, would return to him when he threw it. And also for the great golden boar, Grimbusti, its name meaning golden bristles, that he presented to Freyr. These, along with new hair for Sif, to replace that he himself had actually cut off, and a ship that could be folded up small enough to put it in one's pocket, he obtained from the dwarves, with no little trickery involved, naturally, Loki being Loki. And interestingly enough, his gifts to Odin and Thor would become two of the most iconic things associated with them down through the ages. Mention Thor, we think of the hammer. Mention Odin, we think of his spear. We know Loki also had a shape-shifting ability, becoming on occasions a salmon, a fly, and a mare. The latter perhaps his most famous escapade. Oh yes. Which also resulted in something else very closely associated with Odin. Now the gods were having a fortified wall constructed around Asgard in the early days of its existence to keep out the not always overly friendly Jotnar or giants. The original wall having been damaged in the war between the gods, and they had engaged the services of a builder, a mason, who had offered himself to construct it for them, but they had no idea he was actually a Jotun himself. Oh yes, the plot thickens. He agreed to build the wall, but he had a condition. He wanted the goddess Freya as part of the payment. Now Freya wasn't overly chuffed about that, but Loki persuaded Odin to agree, saying set conditions the builder wouldn't be able to meet. That way you get a wall you won't have to pay for. Odin agreed, seemed like a good idea at the time, setting a time limit for the wall to be finished, only 3 seasons, which the mason also agreed to, even though such a wall could hardly be constructed in that time. Something about that really maybe should have, given them a clue. But, things soon began to look ominous. The reason the mason had accepted the challenge becoming, only too obvious, since he had a magnificent stallion named Svadilfari, which possessed magic power and was enormously strong and powerful, and began hauling such huge loads of stone that the wall would almost certainly be finished well on time, well before time, in fact, which didn't suit Freya one bit. Oh no. Odin still wanted the wall. He still wanted it built, but really he had now no intention of keeping his end of the bargain, which did suit Freya. And he began looking for a way out of the arrangement. Odin wasn't always exactly too impressive in the strict honesty and proper behavior department. Maybe that's why Loki fitted in as well as he did. And who better to scupper the arrangement with the builder than, yes, Loki? He had, after all, been the one who talked Odin into it, so he was given the job of seeing to it that the wall wasn't finished on time, with not very subtle hints as to very unpleasant things that might happen to him if he failed in the task. Loki came up with a plan. Now the stallion, obviously, had to be gotten out of the way. He was still bringing these enormous supplies of stone at a prodigious rate, so Loki shapeshifted into a beautiful mare. And presumably, a mare in heat. He trotted around Svadilfari, flicking his tail sort of thing and fluttering his eyelashes. Horses have long eyelashes, they flutter very well, So, and there he was, fluttering and swooshing his tail. And then he, or rather she, no, these videos are not made for children, just a good thing, is being, available, shall we say. Oh, yes, very available. And once he had Svadilfari's attention, he disappeared off into the woods with the new, very aroused stallion in hot pursuit, panting breathlessly, and neither of them making a reappearance for some reason. Now, no more massive loads of stone. The building work ground to a snail's pace, as the builder had to fetch the stone himself. The conditions of the agreement were not met. There were still parts of the wall unfinished, and Freya breathed a sigh of relief. But horse Loki and genuine horse Svadilfari had been making, how shall I put this delicately, making the most of their time together, one might say. They were very friendly. Yes, they were. The result being that horse Loki became pregnant, spent the next 11 months still as a mare, the horse gestation period being 11 months, in case you didn't know, and then he gave birth to a foal which, oddly enough, had 8 legs, named Sleipnir. and it was presented to Odin. Faster than any other horse, able to run across water or fly through the sky. You know, I can imagine the initial conversation. "Where have you been for the last 11 months, Loki?" "Do you know the gestation period for a horse, Odin? I've spent that time lugging this around, and now it's here, and I'm giving it to you." "What is that thing supposed to be?" "Well, it's the result of me as a horse getting very friendly with a horse, and it looks like a horse, so I think it's possibly a horse, don't you?" "It has 8 legs, Loki." "Yes, funny you should mention that, Odin. I had noticed, especially when I was giving birth to it. Women are so fortunate that their babies only have 2. I thought the damn thing would never come out. Anyway, it's the fastest horse that ever lived. It goes on water or in the air just the same as it does on the land, and it's yours. You are now, thanks to me, of course, the owner of a magic 8-legged horse. Congratulations. Enjoy. Oh, by the way, what happened with that builder?" "Oh, he could not finish on time. His horse ran away, it seems. Oh, what a shame. But he turned out to be a Jotun. So Thor bashed his head in with that lovely hammer you gave him." What a charming story. One interesting aspect of all that, actually, is Odin's attitude to masculinity. Not only did he quite happily practice the normally female magic art of Surtur, taught to him at his own request by Freya, and causing him to be accused of being ergi, or in other words, effeminate, but he seemed to have no problem with Loki having shifted into a female form and having sex with a male. And he was also quite happy to accept the resulting child of the union, Sleipnir. Rather laughably, it was actually Loki who accused him of being ergi, which, given his own crossover sexual activities with a horse, would seem to make him the last one really to bring up that subject. Loki was also responsible for bringing Skadi to Asgard and making her a goddess. She, a Jotun like himself, arrived armed to the teeth, looking for blood to avenge her father, who met his death indirectly thanks to Loki. Her father, Thjatsi, liked to take the form of an eagle, and on one of his little raptor excursions he flew a bit too low and he was hit with a stick by, yes, Loki. Now the eagle flew up, Loki couldn't let go. He was magically attached to the bird by the stick, rising higher and higher and higher into the air, slamming against trees and rocks. But the eagle agreed to let him go if he would help with the kidnapping of Idun and her apples of youth. Given his increasingly precarious position, Loki agreed. And surprisingly, he actually kept his promise. And that resulted in Thjatsi flying off with Idun. The gods figured out who was responsible for Idun's disappearance, and to avoid the inevitable punishment that was coming his way, Loki said that if Freya would give him her feather skin, a cloak of hawk feathers that enabled her to fly, he would fly to Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, and get Idun back, which he does. Not that he had really a lot of choice in the matter. But Thjatsi chases him back to Asgard, and he's killed by the gods. And even though he got what he deserved, he had kidnapped Idun after all, Skadi wants vengeance. However, she agrees that if she can marry one of the gods, and thus become a god herself, well, she'll forget about killing anybody, which the gods agree to. But she has a condition. They must make her laugh. What? Make her laugh? Yes, I mean, that might, on the face of it, seem, pretty simple matter. Tell her a good joke. Ha, ha, ha. She laughs, but, oh, no. Skadi has absolutely no sense of humor. The gods do their best to get a laugh out of her, but they fail miserably. They tell her side-splitting jokes, absolutely roll on the floor laughing jokes, but her reaction is, they pull funny faces. And she's like, boring. Eventually, Loki steps up, and this is Loki at his very best, as indeed is fitting, since he is the one responsible for her being there in the first place. He ties one end of a rope to a goat, the other end to his own testicles, and they have a tug-of-war. Eventually, the goat gives a mighty heave. Loki is pulled off his feet, doubtless with a suitable cry of pain, and lands in Skadi's lap. And she laughs! Well, titters, chuckles, anyway. She then marries Njordr and becomes a god herself as a result. So, we have seen Loki as very useful to the gods on various occasions. but his standing was to hit rock bottom when he played what he may have only intended to be a joke, but turned out to have disastrous consequences. All the gods loved the beautiful Balder, son of Odin and Frigg, and they wished to keep him safe from harm. So Frigg demanded a binding oath from all creation never to harm her son. All the animals and creatures of the land, of the sky and of the water, all plants, all diseases, everything in the 9 realms swore the solemn binding oath never to harm the beautiful Balder. Yes, all save one. Frigg overlooked the mistletoe, but Loki did not. The gods, with a rather odd sense of humour, it must be said, decided it would be great fun to throw things at Balder. I mean, nothing could do him any harm, after all. So they let go a barrage of things at him. Spears, axes, arrows, tree trunks, boulders. It didn't matter what they might chuck at him. Pick up a mountain, bash him over the head with it. Everything just bounced off him. But Loki, seeing the chance of a bit of mischief, got a sharpened length of mistletoe, and he gave it to the blind god Hodor, telling him to join in the fun. Here, join in the fun. Take this and throw it. Throw it as hard as you can. It's lovely. You'll really enjoy it. Here, go on, throw. And he pointed Hodor in the right direction. Did Loki actually intend to kill Balder? Or just give him a painful prick? It seems rather unlikely he intended to kill him. I mean, the son of Odin, after all. But that is what happened. Hodor threw the mistletoe, the one thing in all creation which knew nothing of the oath. It pierced Balder's heart and killed him. That didn't do very much for Loki's popularity, as you might guess, though quite how he talked his way out of it, I really don't know. Oops, sorry about that. Doesn't really, seem like much of an explanation. Eventually, Loki met his downfall, following an episode in which he managed to offend just about all the gods, exchanging insults with Freya, with Bragi, Tyr, Heimdall, Gefn, Idun, Tyr, Thor, Skadi, and Frigg, even going so far as to remind Frigg that he was the one responsible for her son's death. No, not a very smart thing to do, really. Skadi gives him an ominous warning at the end of all the name-calling, saying, "Thou art merry, Loki. Not long wilt thou frisk with an unbound tail. For thee, on a rock's point, with the entrails of thy ice-cold son, the gods will bind." After Thor threatens to bash his head in with Mjolnir, Loki goes off and disguises himself as a salmon, but he's eventually discovered, and all the gods decide to punish him, taking up the suggestion from Skadi, binding him to a rock with the entrails pulled out of his dead son Nari, who was indeed very ice-cold by that time. Skadi goes one further. She was not a woman to offend, obviously. Oh, definitely not. Now, having come up with Loki's punishment, she adds the finishing touch. She puts the icing on the cake, suspending a venomous snake above his head, its venom dripping down onto his face. Loki's wife, Sigyn, tries to help her husband, holding a bowl over him to catch the dripping venom, but each time the bowl is full and she has to empty it, the venom falls directly onto his face, his agonized writhing causing earthquakes, much, I'm sure, to Skadi's enjoyment. She seems the sort of woman who would have got quite a kick out of that. Loki was involved in a great many other adventures before that ignominious episode, but to list them all would require several videos, so I think I shall leave it there. A little bit of detail and information about Loki I thought was appropriate. So that brings us back to the question posed at the start, after quite a bit of verbiage, it must be said. Should Loki be worshipped? Would it indeed be safe to do so? Was he evil or just misunderstood? Oh, somebody likes me on the phone. Now, I know a lot of people hold him in high regard. Others see him as deceitful, the archetype of treachery and totally untrustworthy. Don't worship him. Don't let him get a foot in the door. Now, I would not see it as dangerous to worship him. After all, he made so many enemies. I'm sure he'd look very favorably on anyone who thought him worthy of worship, somebody who actually liked him, That he was evil is debatable. He did some things that were not very nice and hardly honorable, but how much could be regarded as evil, intentionally evil, and not just a matter of uncaring sense of misplaced fun and trickery, is hard to say. An important question regarding that, and I don't think I've seen anyone else actually raise it, would be, did he intend to kill Balder? Now, the fact that neither Odin nor Frigg struck him down on the spot would suggest they didn't think he did. that it was just a stupid prank that went too far. You know, it seems to me that Balder's parents would have reacted far more aggressively than they did had they seen it as a deliberate murder rather than a tragic, stupid accident. So, the questions about Loki, after all the foregoing rather long-winded discussion, remain unanswered, I'm afraid. Sad but true. There really isn't an answer. It's a matter of, well, make up your own mind, which I suppose I could have said just right at the start. Should you worship Loki, well, make up your own mind. Goodbye. I hope you enjoy the video. Oh well. But then that would have deprived you of the obvious, highly educational and informative pleasure of listening to me rambling on for half an hour. Yes. Now, with that, we leave the trickster of the gods. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, well, spread the word. Tell the world, tell your friends, and await further gripping videos. For now, I shall say farewell and goodbye until next time. Bye for now.